if you would, to 2 Samuel. If you remember that book, it's been a while since we were in it. There's been something that came up in our studies in that book last year, I think. This time last year, maybe, when we were around this part. So it tells you how long it's been on my mind. Just something that came up that I think I've found a challenge to my heart, and I think maybe all of us will to some extent. But it's kind of came up from some of the lesser known guys. So this is 2 Samuel in chapter 17. There's a lot of different characters in 2 Samuel, aren't there? There's David, there's Absalom, there's Bathsheba, and then you start from there, you kind of, it drifts off into lesser and lesser remembered people. But they're fascinating, some of these lesser known people and what they did and how they helped or hurt David. So just read a couple of verses to remind us of, or introduce, as the case may be, to these couple of guys. This is chapter 17, verse 27. And this is when David's on the run from Absalom. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodebar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said... So I don't know from your Sunday school days, if you went to Sunday school growing up, if you remember, Barzillai, or Shobi, or Machir, kind of the lesser known heroes of the Bible, aren't they? Right? We don't really think about them. They don't get their own. I've never seen a children's Bible story book with those guys in it, and I've seen a lot of those in the last 7 years. But they kind of drift away. But it's interesting that these three guys kind of stand against some others in this whole episode when David was on the run for his life. His son had decided, I don't trust my dad anymore, or whatever exactly his motivation was. He seemed to, after the whole incident with his sister and his half-brother, he said, Dad didn't bring her justice when she was attacked. I don't trust him anymore. And he just then showed over and over a lot of pride. And he said, that's it. I'm going to kill my dad. I'm going to take his place. Quite drastic, but that's what happened. But in that time then, when David had to flee for his life, some people were a great support to him, like the three we've just read. Others were, stabbed him in the back or the next best thing. And I think they give us this to stand back and not just look at David, but to say, well, here's some people. Would I like to be like them? Or maybe definitely not be like them? And they kind of make us think, well, where do I find myself when it comes to the Lord's anointed king? And where would I have found myself in those days? And these three guys, they definitely did what was right, as we said, but just to remind ourselves of a couple of the others. You remember Shimei? He was a relative of Saul, and he was the guy that as David was running away and with all the people, he ran along kind of the top of the hill and threw dirt clods and rocks at David and shouted out, you deserve all this. This is you deserve everything you're getting here because you're a man of blood. And he was from Saul's family, and David had replaced Saul's family, so he was just having his moment you're getting your comeuppance and good riddance to you, and just let him have it. And one of the David's men said, "Can I go take his head off?" And David said, "No, look, if the Lord has let this happen to me, let the Lord be the judge. Maybe the Lord has told him to curse. We'll just wait and see what happens. Don't take his head off." There are people all around David who were very willing to kill people. It was an intense period of history. But he said, no, we're not doing that. But Shimei just kept doing that the whole time. So it's not enough to have your son behind you who's trying to kill you and the whole country risen against with him, so you have to flee your capital city, leave everything behind. Now this guy's just throwing insults at you. That was Shimei. But then there was Ziba, or Ziba, however you like to say it. He was a servant of Saul. And if when David was down, Shimei's response was to kick him when he was down, well, Ziba comes along and he, in his vulnerability, he uses him. He lies about Mephibosheth, another medium kind of character. We've at least heard that name, right? So Mephibosheth was a son of Saul who David had brought close to him and said, you can stay with me. I'm going to show kindness. Sorry, a son of Jonathan, a grandson of Saul. So for Jonathan's sake, David said, you come stay with me. I'm going to honor my word to your father, Jonathan, because we were best friends. And Mephibosheth had. But now when it comes to him having to flee, this servant, Ziba, who was told to look after Mephibosheth and look after his lands, he comes and tells David, look, I'm sorry to say, but Mephibosheth has stabbed you in the back here. He thinks he's going to get the kingdom back. And look, I brought you all this stuff. And he brings him all this stuff for the people. And it looks great. And David jumps the gun a bit, has to be said, and says, okay, look, you can have all of your master's lands. Mephibosheth loses all of that. And it seems Ziba was that kind of person who just was totally in it for himself and took advantage of the situation. And we come across those kind of people sometimes in life, don't we? God forgive us if we have been those kind of people in life to others. But perhaps we have. When somebody is down, when they're facing a hard time, we see what wrong they've done and we focus in on those things and let them have it. Like Shimei. Or we just kind of, maybe you've known people who just kind of maneuver and they work in a situation and they're able to just get their own angle in and get as much in it as they can while seeming to be friendly to us. You've known people like that probably. David had both types around him. And with people around him like that, it's like a breath of fresh air when you come to these three guys. Three men who come in, Barzillai, Shobi, and Machir, and they see a need, and they try to meet it. And we know a few things about each of these men. One, especially, Machir was actually the guy who had been Mephibosheth's protector. Back in Lodebar, where David had sent to find Jonathan's son, he had found him and found him in the care of this man named Machir. So he was somebody who was kind of in the habit of looking after royalty on the run. He was already good at that. But he didn't let his connection with Saul's house kind of cloud his vision. But he showed this kind of loyal friendship that he had seen David show Mephibosheth. Interesting, isn't it? And I just can't help but think that when he saw, here is this king who granted replaced Saul, who had been my master, but here is this king who is being loyal to what he said to Jonathan, and he's looking after his son. And I just wonder if that's what helped motivate him to say, well, that's the kind of king I want. And his response in this situation when he was low, he with his two friends, was to bless David, to show that kind of loyal friendship that he had seen the king show to Mephibosheth, to show what he had seen when someone was down and out, to lift them up. But the specific thing he brought in this case to help him, to bless him, was food, supplies, the stuff he needed. I had a chance once to be in kind of that part, roughly, of the region of Israel across when I was in Jordan a couple of years ago. And I don't know exactly how much the geography and the climate has changed in that time. I haven't read up enough to know. But I can tell you now, if you were in that part of the world with a few hundred people having to run for your life, you're desperate. There's not much there. There is not much to keep you alive. You would need help. And these three guys, with their wealth and what they had at their disposal, they came and brought, things like beds, very practical, basins, because you need stuff to eat out of. These people weren't on a camping trip. They were running for their lives. Earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds and sheep and cheese from the herd. So nice things, as well as just a thing to keep body and soul together. Some of this starts to sound like a nice meal. They brought it for David and the people with him to eat, for they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. There's nothing so good as the help of someone who doesn't have to help. They're not under obligation to, but they do. And maybe even if they have a reason for not wanting to help. You think about it. For these three men, maybe they'd have a reason to try not to do this, because if Absalom wins this civil war, they are for it, because they have aided and abetted the enemy. If David loses this and Absalom is victorious, these guys will be the first to go. And they knew that, but they took the risk. They chose to stand with the Lord's anointed in the time of his rejection. They chose to stand with him. And the reason this has come home to me so much, and what I think these kind of lesser known characters teach us, is a very simple lesson in a way, but maybe one that's easy to forget in the busyness of life. And it's just how much we need personal interaction, how much we need to look after one another, how much we need hospitality, how much we need to share what we have with others to meet the needs that they have. I think that's something that's easy to forget. There are so many things that compete for our attention. Good things, and just the stuff of life. And there's so much, though, to overwhelm people, all of us, in one time or another. Whether that's loneliness or the overwhelming times in life that come, mental health challenges. Maybe you're a part of a family where you're the only Christian, or there aren't many Christians, or you're not surrounded by a good support network. That can weigh you down. And what has God provided to meet that? He's provided a family. The wider family of the church and internationally, to the local church and the local body. And that example is not used lightly or by accident in the New Testament. That's very much, we're parts of a body. And Paul talks about that and says, when one bit of that body suffers, you hurt your hand, the whole body feels it. And it should be that way. And sometimes maybe if we're missing out that a part of the body is hurting, maybe we're not connected well enough. And I think sometimes when we think of hospitality, I think for some people in particular, this big oh no, not that. Because what comes to mind is this big dinner, coming from America, I assume, it's like you can't have people over unless it's Thanksgiving dinner or something, unless it's Christmas dinner, unless it's this huge thing. And I get that, and I know we're all different that way. And I want to be quick to say, hospitality is not just that. Hospitality is not even necessarily having people into your home. Yes, it can be. It can include that, mixing it up with families in different ways. But ultimately, I think what it